Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books, a $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. I'm lucky today I got a guest. He's a retired NYPD sergeant who spent time in the 3-4 precinct as a cop in Washington Heights. Then he went to the 4-8 precinct as a supervisor before finishing up his career in Midtown North precinct in Manhattan. I'd like to welcome Jesse Taylor. Jesse, welcome to the show, and how you doing today?
Excellent. Thanks a lot for having me.
No, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So, Jesse, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you got into the NYPD.
I grew up in Orange County. I grew up in a very small town called Fort Montgomery, which was between Bear Mountain and West Point. It was very small. The people knew half of your business, and the other 50% they made up. Used to say, and everyone was related. Back then, this was the 70s and 80s when I grew up, so it wasn't. Now it's a suburb of the city. They call it Copland. But back then, it was really the country. Lots of farms. I knew a lot of people who had farms. It was just, it was the country. And there was this mystique about New York City, something about being a cop in the city that just seemed to me like, wow, that's like the top of law enforcement, like the highest echelon of law enforcement. So I met one of my closest friends. My parents had a beach house down at the Jersey Shore, and my friend Tim was from Staten Island, and his parents had a house down there as well. We grew up together. I've known him since I was 5, and he got on the job in '93, I believe it was, and then he was talking about it, and he was telling all his war stories, and it sounded very interesting. And then I met a lot of his friends. We were hanging out, and I said, these are really good guys. I liked them, and I just always liked people from the city for some reason. Maybe because it was so different from how I grew up, and I just liked the city people, and it seemed just very interesting to me. So I got on in July 7th, 1999. Jeff Giuliani swore us all in. Good sized class, 1,200 at Queens College, and that was the start.
So when you came on the job, there wasn't NSU, right? It was straight from the academy, and then you went to a precinct, right?
Yes, no NSU. We didn't have that impact nonsense like today, though. We still had FTU and field training unit. So I went. You did go out though for a month while you were still in the academy, while you had a gray shirt on.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Do that, and
No, we didn't do that, but I remember seeing the gray shirts. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
we had to do that. And of course, the perps are all going to mess with you because they know that you're
On
new,
probation, and you're new, and
rookie, and you don't know what you're doing, and your leather's nice and shiny. And so I had to do. I don't know how I got assigned. Because I've lived upstate my whole life, so I got assigned to district. What is that? District 30, all the way out in Queens. Is that the one all the way out in Queens, or is that District 20?
I'm not a transit guy. I only know District 12.
I was all the way out in Queens. It was like a 75-mile commute one way.
Oh shit!
So I had to do that for a whole month and just stand on the platforms in Queens. But it was okay. Transit is its own little world. I saw how, at least I got some experience, and I learned how to talk to people. And I remember watching this sergeant, and he had like 18 years on. And, these two guys were brawling on the platform. We break it up, and they're still ready to go at it, and they're yapping back and forth. And I watched him talk to these two guys. We separated them. And the way he talked to them, I mean, this guy was so smooth. And he had worked in Harlem most of his career and then gotten promoted and went to transit. And he had both these guys like thanking him when he left. He had both guys feeling like, I was guy here. I won the fight. That cop really knows what happened. And, and he sent them both on their way. And it was like, I watched him. I was like, wow, this guy's like a master. Like he just completely handled that situation, just all with his mind. And, that was like my first interaction on how how you talk to people makes a huge difference in preventing a lot of nonsense, And that was my first, it was a funny story. It's my first potential run-in too in transit. Like I said, you don't know anything. You're sitting there on the platform and you know nothing. And people are coming up to you and they're asking you, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm the police now. I have to answer these questions. So they paired us up, with a veteran. So I'm just standing on the platform looking around, and this huge guy comes up. I mean, huge. I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6 foot tall, about 250 pounds. This guy is a full head taller than me and just gigantic. And he comes up and he just gets right in my face and he stares at me. This huge black guy, and I'm looking up at him and I'm going, oh my, like, what does he want? And he just keeps staring, staring, staring. And I look to the cop, the veteran, and he doesn't have a care in the world. He's swinging his nightstick, like nothing's going on. And he's still staring at me. He's getting closer and closer in my face. And now I'm like, this is going to be the first guy that I have to fight. Like, I can't warm up with like a normal sized human being or something. And then thank God I was a boxing fan. And I remembered, I recognized him. And I went, Mitch Blood Green. And he goes, yes, my man. And I go, this guy went 10 rounds with Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson couldn't knock this guy out. This guy had fought Mike Tyson and was the first guy who, took Tyson the distance. And his mom lived out in Queens, and he was always, riding the subway back and forth. And I think he just wanted me to acknowledge him, so, and he was very nice and polite after that, shaking my hand. We're talking back and forth. And I was just like, oh, thank God, because he was gigantic, when he shook my hand, it was like twice his hands were like twice the size of mine. I mean, he was huge, very nice when he was sober.
You're the second person to tell me a Mitch Blood Green story. I was talking to another guy who was a sergeant in the 3-2, and he said he was working a midnight as a new sergeant, and Mitch Blood Green just came into the station house and wanted to talk. And he was like almost the same story where he came in, he was intimidating looking, and then finally when the sergeant figured out who he was like his best friend.
Yeah. Couldn't have been nicer after that. He just, and he was I'm a big boxing fan. The guy was an incredible boxer. It's just the alcohol and drugs got to him. I mean, but he was a tremendous boxer and the nicest guy in the world. Used to visit his mom regularly over there in Queens, but he had a propensity for alcohol and he would smoke crack and just get crazy, and he and Tyson got in that brawl at Freddie's Fashion Mart in Harlem on 125th Street, like 4 a.m. Tyson talked about that, so. Yeah, so I did my field training there, and then we had to go back to the academy, and then I graduated, and I put in for the 3-4, and I was lucky enough to get it. That's where I wanted to work. I wanted to work in Washington Heights, and it was a good place to start. I really enjoyed it there.
Well, back in the 80s and 90s, the 3-4 precinct would regularly lead the city in homicides and gun arrests. So, I mean, even by the time you got there, it was still a very busy place. I mean, I was up there when you were up there. That actually, I had the 3-4 team for a while, so I know the 3-4 quite well. What was it like for a rookie cop to be in a precinct, and describe Washington Heights and what goes on up there?
It was the neighborhood was all Dominican, and it was pretty much like the drug headquarters for the East Coast. Just a tremendous amount of drugs. And all the violence centered around the drugs, everything. But it was also nice in that, unlike a hardcore ghetto in the Bronx, because of the drug money, there was a lot of businesses. There was a lot of restaurants, clubs. There's a lot of things going on. And generally, people were happy out on the street. It wasn't that when I was
It's true.
It wasn't that misery that, poverty can make you miserable. And, a lot of times people in the Bronx were miserable. And a lot of times people in Washington Heights were happy. But everything was about drugs. So I saw my first homicide victim, my first week. I was still like doing, the sergeant was still getting us our lockers. It was like our first day. And he says, hey, you want to go see a homicide victim? And I was like, sure. So they had got this guy when the sanitation went to move this garbage bag. I was like, wow, this thing is heavy. They're like, what the heck is in here? They open it up, and they had shot this guy in the head, and then they had duct taped him up into a ball and put him in a garbage bag and put him out with the garbage. And so, that was my first week. I saw my first homicide victim, and it was nothing like I said, what those guys who went through the 80s and 90s there. I mean, I think in 91 they had 123 homicides in 1 year. I mean, that's just insane. A murder every 3 days. The cops who were there, these guys were the real deal. I mean, I looked up to them. I had a tremendous amount of respect for them, and I just wanted to learn from them, So I kind of did whatever they told me, and it was good. It was still field training unit, so we went out on foot posts, and you got assigned your foot post, and it was good. You learned how to talk to people. You learned how to handle yourself, get comfortable being out there. And then I remember the first time it clicked and I learned how to read the street. I was sitting on 190th Street in St. Nick, and there's just drug dealing going everywhere, all along St. Nicholas Avenue, from 181st Street all the way up to 193rd Street. Pretty much every corner is a drug corner. And I was sitting there watching these guys, watching the whole crew. And before I was clueless. I didn't know who was doing what, you know, and then it all just clicked like, okay, that guy's the steerer. That guy hides the money over here. Then he goes in this building up there and gets the dope. And it just came to me like that after being out there for days. The way police work is there's no you have to there's no shortcuts. You have to get experience, and that's the way you learn the streets. And it just came from being out there constantly on foot for for 6 months or a year in the same area, just over and over. So I still believe in I think the foot posts were a great thing. They will not put rookies out on foot posts by themselves anymore in the NYPD. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, that's been the policy for a while, but no more of like you got your you got your post and you handle it. That's it. No, they don't do that anymore. So it was good. And then the sergeant would take you out once in a while, and you'd learn to handle some jobs, write some summonses, and then you were still the low man on the totem pole, though. So if they needed someone to sit on the stinky DOA, you were it. The ED sit on the EDP and CPMC, you were it. And so I get my first stinky DOA. It was like, wow. It was July, and the guy had been in there weeks, and it was July in the city. And this old timer opens the door and he goes, "Oh, no, please don't get up, sir." And the guy was decomposing on the couch. And he says, "Coffee? No, thanks. I'm good." And I went and you'd never seen anything like this, and
Right.
you go and his head was completely black. And there was large portions of him that the maggots had eaten, and and the stench is just horrific. You don't get it out. You can't eat. At least I couldn't. I could never eat the rest of the tour after being in a bad day. Yeah, I couldn't. And I would take my clothes home and wash them automatically because I could never get that smell out. Even if it wasn't there, I thought it was there. So you get used to just handling basic police jobs. It's not glamorous. But it was a good way to learn.
It was not like you summed it up with the 3-4. Everything revolved around drugs. And yes, there were nickel and dime bags of coke being sold, but kilos. First, it comes into Jackson Heights, Queens with the Colombians back then. Then the Dominicans are the ones that sell to everybody on the eastern seaboard out of Washington Heights. And it was nothing back then to stop a car or a person carrying a shopping bag filled with a couple of kilos of coke.
Yeah.
Did something like that ever happen to you?
Yeah, do you remember the model block program? Okay, so they had us out on the model block. That was when a block got so bad and the residents were, they would go to the community council meetings and the precinct meetings and complain like, you have to do something. Like, our block is out of control. Basically we're hostages in our own apartment buildings because of the drug deal. So they had Arden Street from Nagel to Sherman as the model block at that time, and they would put 8 of us, fresh rookies on one block from 10 to 6, and then 6 at night till 2 in the morning. And I remember we were just walking there, and they were still able to move stuff because we were going up to this building. As we're coming up to the building, this guy comes out, he sees us, panics, drops this bag, and just takes off running. We lose him in the crowd. We go back to the bag, $17,000 in cash. We're so new. We're like, oh my God, this is an IEP test. You call the sergeant. It was obviously just he didn't expect to see us. It was $17,000,
money, right?
Yeah, and $17,000 in drug money. But the amount of drugs was it was staggering. They were coming right up from Miami right to New York and then going right back. When I was on the Midnights, we had this guy come into the precinct, and he looked like a very young kid, a Cuban kid, maybe like 21 years old. And he looked like he had the Tony Montana starter set on, and he was driving this older model BMW. It was nothing new. It was nothing nice. And he was scared out of his wits because he was coming up the West Side Highway, up to Henry Hudson by Dyckman Street. And he said they tried to carjack him and actually let rounds at his car. And his story, we brought him up to the squad. Now, he was scared to death because these guys had, let rounds go at him, and he was not prepared for that. So we brought him up to the squad, and the detective squad is interviewing, and his story was just not panning out. And he's not very smart. So they were able, I don't know how, but they got consent for him saying, this doesn't make sense. That's not a car that someone would carjack. It's an older model. Oh, well, it's not really the car. It's what's in the car. He lets slip. And they're like, oh, would you mind popping the trunk? Somehow this dummy lets him, pops the trunk voluntarily. 17 kilos of cocaine. were in the trunk of the BMW. 17 kilos that he had driven up from Miami, and somehow they knew and they were ready to, to shoot him on the Henry.
Rip. Yeah, it was a rip.
Yeah, and so they take him in. The next day I come in. This was on the midnights. The next day I come into work and I got to do the prisoner transport. So we're transporting just a regular assault 3. Just a guy who got collared for a fist fight, and this guy. So they're both in the back, and the guy asks me, "Oh, officer, you think I'm going to see the judge tonight and get out tonight?" And I'm looking at his booking sheet. I said, "Oh yeah, assault 3, you'll see the judge. You'll be out tonight." And then, the other guy's like, "Oh, will I be getting out tonight?" And I'm looking at, A1 felony, 17 kilos. I'll be getting out tonight, pal. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a wait for you, But some guys get in the game and they're not cut out for the game. You have to be very violent to survive in that environment. And he was just not prepared for that. The first time someone shot at him, he ran to the police. So not a smart move.
Well, he had 17 keys in the trunk. Did you come across a lot of traps or secret compartments in cars? Because working in auto crime, precinct used to call us all the time.
Yeah, fine. They were really hard to. There was a lot we knew, but boy, they were hard to open. That's why we would call you guys. We knew there was a place on Jerome Avenue in the Bronx that was doing all the installation too.
Yep.
But it was like a 10-step sequence of events you had to do to get these traps to open. A lot of times it was tough to get them to open.
There was a couple of places on Jerome, and there was a place on Cromwell over in the 4-4 that we knew of.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure there was more.
Yep.
So I worked on the other side when I was on patrol, and then in anti-crime. I worked in the 5-0 on the other side of the 225th Street Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up, I went to Catholic high school with a lot of Irish kids in the Bronx that were from Inwood. And I used to hang out in Inwood when I was 14, 15 years old. The first time I was in Inwood, I was in that park on Seaman Avenue and 207th?
Yeah.
That little park there. I kid you not. It was the first time I was in Inwood. I was 14 years old. I was in that park. A guy got shot sitting on a bench. It was like some of the older Irish kids got into a fight with some of the Spanish kids.
Yep.
The Spanish kids came back to the park, and I'm hanging out drinking, a nip, drinking beer. I'm like 14 years old in this park. Kids walked over to him, boom, boom, shot the guy, like literally on a park bench, like 8 feet from me.
Yeah. There was I can say that there was more. I responded to more shootings in the Bronx, but the craziest shootings were in Washington Heights. Just where you had 3-4 guys shot, or just crazy incidents. We had one down at Dyckman Street, and this is before Dyckman Street is all built up now. It's very nice, a lot of bars and restaurants, but back then there was just one.
Oh no.
And especially all the way out to the river, so from Broadway out to the river, there was nothing on Dyckman. A couple of old Irish bars and then that one club at the end. But, now it's completely built up. But so we get a call for shots fired, and we get there and there's 4 people shot. And I mean, there were casings everywhere. One guy had a 9mm, one guy had a 45, and I had never seen that. I mean, these guys, this was like a Wild West shootout. I mean, there's like 30, 40 casings on the ground. And so one guy, the 3 guys look like they're going to survive. I remember I go up to one guy and I said, "I'm going to get a dying declaration like they told us in the police academy, where the guy's dying and he tells you who did it." So I go up to him, and it was like something out of a movie. They had shot him literally between the eyes so that his glasses broke in half, and the bullet entered his one eye. So the other eye is looking up at me and going around and around in circles. And I'm telling him, "Who did this to you, buddy? Tell me now, who did this?" And he's just gurgling, and he's seeing God. And yeah, he went out of the picture pretty quickly. And there was just rounds. There were so many rounds while I was waiting for crime scene and the squad to get there. I went to the bodega and I bought a bag of red Solo cups, and I was just covering all the rounds with red Solo cups all over. And then these guys were big players. They were all wanted by the DEA, and they had been, they were moving kilos in New York and Boston, all up and down the East Coast, it turns out. And they were supposed to make a big deal. And, one guy had the drugs, and the one guy said, "I want the drugs," and started shooting. So that was, but there's a lot of Wild West shootouts like that. This one, luckily, everyone involved was in the drug game. It was sad when, you'd have just a passerby, an innocent civilian.
Right.
this, which happened a lot too.
Were you in the 3-4? And I don't know if this happened in the 3-4, the 3-3. I think it's two guys get killed in a car, and squad's investigating it. Crime scene comes, and a day or two later, the family shows up at the precinct and says, in the trunk of the car there was $250,000.
Really?
Were you in the 3?
I don't know. That might have been the 3.
Might have been, or it might have been before you got there. But basically, what happens is starts an IAB investigation.
Yeah.
And the detective, and it was 3 people it was like a guy from the squad, the patrol sergeant, and like a detective from crime scene. So like 3 guys that didn't work together in 3 different places. And they're looking into it. And the squad guy's dad used to work in IAB.
Mm-hmm.
He comes forward with a quarter of the money and says, they forced me into doing this, and here's the money. So IAB jumps on it. They get search warrants for the other 2 guys' houses. They hit their houses, find absolutely nothing, and those guys kept to their story. We don't know what he's talking about. If there was money in that car, he took it, and they were never able to prove if they split it 3 ways or one guy got cold feet.
Yeah.
Turned it in trying to burn them. And he wound up getting transferred to the 5-0, and no one would talk to the guy because now it's like, first off, you're a thief, well, you're a rat, and you're a friggin' thief, obviously, right? So it was a big. I thought you might have been privy to that, but that's probably the 3-3 or maybe a little before you came on.
Yeah.
It's a wild. I mean, there was just like you just said, the whole precinct revolved around drugs, and like you said, unlike the Bronx where there was abject poverty, the 3-3 and the 3-4, that money was used to launder money. So the 3-4 your precinct had more clothing stores, restaurants, before cell phones, telecommunicados, where you could call the Dominican Republic for 8 cents a minute, or
Pronto NBO, those beauty salon and a barber shop on every single corner, and they would be open all night. You could get a haircut at 3 a.m. in Washington Heights, and the women could get their hair done and a manicure and a pedicure at 2 in the morning. Every corner.
And people that don't live in the 5 boroughs, I mean, and this isn't just happening now. This goes back over 30 years. The 3-4 was like a third world country in that the signs were in Spanish, right? And all the businesses were in Spanish. It was dictated exclusively, and English was not the language spoken on the street. We were the ones who had to learn Spanish or basic Spanish just to fill out an online booking worksheet. Where do you live? Where do you work? Where is the gun?
Yeah. There was no English spoken. Luckily, my partners always spoke Spanish because I don't know how you would do it otherwise. I mean, it would just be impossible, So, but it was a really good place. You did have a lot of support from the community, though. There was a lot of law and order people who really supported the police there. So that's what I really liked about it. That you didn't get that in the Bronx, but you really got it in Washington Heights. There was a lot of people who really appreciated what you were doing out there and who supported you. So it was good that way.
So later on in your career, you take the sergeant's exam, you pass, and you wind up in the 4-8 precinct in the Bronx. Go into what that was like from you going as a cop on patrol. Now you're a sergeant, right? People are looking at you differently, and you're in a different borough.
Yeah, so I wanted to go to the Bronx. Again, I put down the 4-4, the 4-6, and the 4-8. And the 4-8 was my first choice because we had a couple bosses from who were from the 4-8 and the 3-4, and they said, go there. That's a good place to work. So I did. And yeah, it was a big change, though, because, like I said, it's the poorest congressional district in the country. That area, the 4-8, the 4-2. I mean, it's just poor. And there's just a lot of anger. People walking around on the street were angry. And there's a lot of senseless crime. When I was there 7-8 years, I had 3 child homicides that I handled, like kids hit by stray bullets, and killed. There's just a lot of senseless violence there. But I had a great squad. They threw me right to the wolves. They gave me like the most senior squad in the Bronx. I got promoted. I only had, even though I come from patrol and I come from a busy precinct, I only had like 7.5 years on the job, so hardly like I was a salty dog or anything, and they gave me a squad where half the guys had 15 plus years, and the other guys were all like 10 to 15s, so, they test you like anywhere, but I knew how to do patrol. I came from patrol. I didn't hide in the property clerk's office and study. I wasn't in some other scam inside. So they knew I was, you know what I mean? So
And I know exactly what you mean.
so they knew at least I came from the street and I was, knew how to handle that. So, but a great group of guys. And these guys were, man, they were collar animals. I mean, they were just like collaring everything. And, they were hungry for overtime. And, they were buffs, and it was really a great group of guys. But the one thing I noticed right away in the Bronx, though, I was getting all these DPs across the desk, declined to prosecute from the DA's office, and it seemed like every other arrest I'm getting when I'm doing the desk, and I was like, I had had one DP in my whole career, and I knew the sergeant ordered me to take it. I knew it was a DP. Other than that, in Manhattan, every arrest goes through. Every arrest. You see in the Bronx right away, they are looking to shit can every arrest right off the start. And I was just like, this is unbelievable. They shit can 20% of the arrests right off the top, right off the top.
It's so funny. That was the next question I swear to God, the next question I was going to ask you is, how quick did it take you to figure out the differences between the Manhattan DA's office, which they treat you fairly, and then the Bronx is like anything goes.
And then what also I thought was ridiculous when, when you made a robbery arrest in Manhattan, you would get the victim's name, his address, and, his pedigree, and you would call the ADA and you'd say, okay, this person told me XYZ happened and I locked this, perp up for robbery. And that would be it. That would be the end of it. Okay, great, officer. And then later, if they had trouble getting them, like a lot of times with the Chinese delivery guys, I would have to go hunt them down because their bosses never wanted to let them go and, yoke them into the car and bring them down to court to testify in grand jury or trial. Well, in the Bronx, they would not accept the cop's word. So they wouldn't accept that, okay, the complainant told me X, Y, and Z, and I arrested this guy for robbery. They would have to produce that complainant within 24 hours or the case got DP'd. And a lot of the complainants, they don't want to be bothered. Maybe their work, they can't take off work to go down,
They're so traumatized, they need a couple of days before.
Yeah, or, whatever the reason. But they're basically saying that they don't believe you, that, that you're flaking this perp that you locked up for robbery. It's just crazy. It's really that's when I said, boy, all the horror stories I heard about the Bronx and the district office, they're all true. They're all true. And you really have cops working in the worst conditions in that borough. I mean, that's the toughest borough to work in, there's no doubt. And the most violence. And it's just a hard place to work. And then you have the DA's office against you instead of working with you. Yeah, I used to and then I remember going to testify, and we're like in Manhattan, I was like, when you went to testify at court, you would go sit when you were waiting to testify in the judge's chambers. They would come and get you and you'd sit in the judge's chambers and relax. In the Bronx, sitting out there with the perp's family and all, and all his boys. I was like, what is this? And then I said, when you're
breaking your balls.
Yeah, I said, this is crazy. And then I was telling the guys, I said, when you put someone away in Manhattan and the guy, he pleaded or he got a certain amount of time, whatever, he took 2 to 3 years in state prison, you'd get a nice letter from the district attorney's office saying so-and-so pled guilty to robbery in the second degree, and he took 1 to 3 years in state prison. You had no idea where your perps went in the Bronx. They never acknowledged that you did anything.
You wouldn't know. You wouldn't. Sometimes you'd never hear a thing, and then you go into bads or something, and you look it up, and you're like, it got DP'd.
Yeah.
And I would get pissed, and I would call up, and but it's
it's insane. It's insane. And I would tell the guys how nice, and I didn't appreciate it at the time, as a cop in Manhattan, but once I got to the Bronx, I was like, wow, this is a disgrace, and I would tell the guys, like how much different it was and how much better it was, But that's why they were able to clean up Manhattan and not the Bronx, And you had the smarter DAs. Everyone wanted to work in the Manhattan office because that's the
There was prestige. There was the prestige to work in the Manhattan. It was almost like it was the ones that didn't quite make it to the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Southern District would wind up in the Manhattan DA's office.
These were all Ivy League graduates. They were going big careers in the private sector. And they would I remember one guy told me, because I made a pretty good case. He's like, listen, I want to make cases. One of the ADAs, he's like, so here's my cell number. And he's like, if you get he says, call me and I'll come in even if I'm not working and we'll draw it up. They would never do that in the Bronx. I mean, forget it, So Yeah, it was a whole different world. Just a lot of violence, a lot of shootings, a lot of stabbings, a lot of robberies. In a busy night in the summer, you would have 3 or 4 robberies just on the 4 to 12 tour.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
It was crazy. And then we would see if we would go 5 for 5 with shootings. In the summer, like five shootings in a row on the 4 to 12. You would easily go 5 shootings in a row on all 3 tours, whether it's on the Midnight State Tour 4 to 12. Yeah, it was a very busy place to work, but it was a lot of senseless violence too. Like we had kids playing that knockout game where they would go up to elderly people and knock them out from behind and rob them. Just crap like that that didn't happen in Washington Heights. There was a lot of street justice administered in Washington Heights, if
Yeah.
something like
If they
that.
had a guy ripping, like someone not from the neighborhood try to rip someone off, they'd put him in the hospital.
Absolutely. And I remember we had it was a big case on the news. There was a crazy guy going around, and he was slashing Dominican girls' faces with a razor, like beautiful young Dominican
Yeah,
women.
yeah, I do remember that.
Well, the neighborhood got to him before we did, and they did a number on him, and then the police showed up and picked him up. But yeah, they exacted the street justice, and much deserved, because he was just a psycho and walking up to unsuspecting girls and cutting their faces with a razor blade. But yeah, the neighborhood got him, and that was it. But you saw a lot of stuff in the Bronx that you just didn't see anywhere else, and it was depressing. It was a lot of times it's a depressing place to work.
Well, I did my NSU in the 4-8. I was there for 6 months, and then I worked in the Bronx my whole career, so I was always in and out of the 4-8. On 187th Street and Arthur Avenue, when I was around, there was a heavy mafia presence.
Yeah.
Were they still there?
Nah, the Albanians had taken over Arthur Avenue mostly. There were still some guys. You'd see these guys in the sharkskin suits, like right out of Central Casting, some of the mafia guys. But their presence was pretty small. It was mostly the Albanians had taken over most of Arthur Avenue by the time I got there.
See, when I was there, it was all Italians, and there was 1 or 2 social clubs.
Yeah.
Albanians.
Yep.
But they were starting to make inroads. Like they were starting to take over a lot of the rackets.
Yes. And they all carry guns, and they don't talk to the police. And that was my first day on patrol in the Bronx. I had 5 guys stabbed in a social club, all Albanians. No one saw a thing. No one says anything. And I got 5 people stabbed. And, I'm trying to set up a crime scene. I'm trying to I got to write a 49 about this. I'm trying to get names, and no one wants to talk to me. No one's talking to me. It was a shit show. I mean, it wasn't an easy first one to handle. But, the one thing I knew how to handle. I'd handled a bunch of shootings and stabbings as a cop in the 3-4. So I was prepared for that aspect of it. But it's different, because now as a sergeant, you got to make sure everything's done right. And if you screw up, the
Right.
screaming at you. And then it's a tough transition those first 6 months, because everyone's not sure about you. Is this guy okay? Is he not? And then, they put you out there on patrol, in a busy place. It's hard. And then the desk is worse than patrol. The desk is just a zoo. And the amount of prisoners that you're dealing with, you remember lodging, how bad that was. So we'd have 42 prisoners in the back and 20 up front. I might as well have been in corrections. I'm trying to handle 60 prisoners, and still run the precinct desk. It was insane. And so it was a tough adjustment. And then, you hear the complaining from the cops, and then you get it from above, so you get it from both ends. The captain screams at you, and the cops complain to you. But, I always said, I came on this job a man, and I'm going to leave a man. I'm not going to kiss ass to any CEO, and I never did. And I didn't really care what they said to me or did, because I was like, you can't fire me. I'm not doing anything wrong. If I make a mistake, whatever. You want to break my balls? You want to give me CDs? I don't care. You know what I mean? But my attitude was, I'm going to take care of my guys. I'm going to, look out for my fellow sergeants. I'm going to take care of the cops in my squad. And then that was it. And that's what I did. Because of that, I was never on any fast track. That's probably why I was on patrol my entire career. But I genuinely liked doing patrol. I was one of those few people, maybe I was nuts. I liked wearing the uniform every day. I liked going out on patrol, the camaraderie. I just, the excitement. I just genuinely liked patrol. I never wanted to do anything else. So that's basically all I did my entire career until the end. So, but it was fun.
Let me throw some spots at you that I remember. Was there still a dust spot on Daly Avenue?
Yeah, that's angel. You know you're in the ghetto with the angel dust. Because that is just an end of the road drug. Everyone who takes it ends up naked and either on a rooftop or blocking an intersection completely naked.
The guy, you know how long that spot's been there? Before I was on the job, the
Yeah,
junkies in my neighborhood I used to hear. I didn't know where Daly Avenue was, but I
yeah,
used to hear they're going up to Daly Avenue to get dust, and then I'm in NSU 7. I get a foot post, and I'm on Tremont off of Daly, and I'm like, oh, this is where Daly Avenue is. Let
yeah.
me find the dust spot. And then there were two dust spots. There was the one in the 4-8, and then when I was in Manhattan North Narcotics, there was a dust spot. And I think it was in the 2-3 or the 2-5, but I think it was the 2-5, and it was like, you don't want to deal with that shit. It just smells so bad. I mean, it's just like an evil thing.
It is, and we had one guy when we were rookies in the 3-4. We had one guy who used to come down from Westchester, get high on angel dust, take off all his clothes, and then block the intersection at Dykeman and Sherman, which is a major intersection. Naked every time, and we're on the model block there. We would have to go and wrestle with this guy and put it in an ambulance. And so that was my experience with them. And then we get to we had a crazy job one night. This guy was dusted, and of course, as usual, I guess they must get so hot, so they took off all their clothes. So he got dusted. He's completely naked, and he's blocking the intersection at 108. I think it was 180th Street, I think it was like Park Avenue or Washington Avenue. So we get there, and I get his name, and I'm waiting for the ambulance to get there first, before we try anything. So his name was Julio. So I'm trying to get. He's still, for someone on angel dust, he's speaking pretty lucidly, and I'm trying to get a rapport going. I'm just waiting for the ambulance to get there because then we could get the gurney out, and then they get that sheet we can throw over him, and if we could taser him, he can fall on the gurney, and when we can throw that sheet over him, and that way we don't have to wrestle with the naked guy. So we're getting going, and I'm getting the rapport going. It's working okay. And then, of course, you get a big crowd, free show in the ghetto. You get like 200 people, and now everyone's filming it. And then while we're talking, Julio starts telling me, he says, I need some Oxycontin, some Oxy pads, and an Iron Man costume. I said, oh, well, we could work on that, Julio. And then while he's telling me this, he starts masturbating. And I'm like, Julio, no, we can talk, but you cannot masturbate while we're speaking. All right, that's where the line gets drawn here. So thank God, just as he started that, the ambulance came up. We got the gurney right up behind him. And I just said, guys, just take him. Boom, they bum rush him. They get him onto the gurney. We throw the sheet over him, hold him down, and we're able to strap him down. And then I just told the two rookies there, this is all you guys. Welcome to the NYPD.
What about, was 183 in Bathgate still jumping?
Yeah, all along, there was just so many spots in there. In the 183 in Bathgate, and then 187 in Prospect. That was a heavy Prospect. They were some bad guys up there. And then, out of Daly Avenue, that was all out in Sector Eddy, still going. So it was, it was a very busy place. But like I said, great cops. I mean, I worked with some of the best cops in the world. Those guys were amazing. And, still friends with them today. I'll do anything for those guys. I really learned a lot from them, too, because I wasn't so arrogant that I would say, I'm the sergeant, I know everything. They would, we'd get to a scene and they would say something like, hey, Sergeant, maybe you should do this and this. I'd say, you know what, you're right. Good thinking, because these guys had, like I said, they had been out on the streets twice as long as I had. And they knew the neighborhood, they knew the spots, they knew everything, so I wasn't going to be like, I made sergeant just because I couldn't stand the morons that I had. I said, I'm not taking orders from these idiots anymore. We had just a bad run there where we had just the entire 4 to 12 tour. I mean, they were idiots, and they had all come from, the property clerk's office or 1PP or anywhere, but they could not do basic patrol, and they had no business being out on patrol and being supervisors. So I was like, if those idiots can pass that test, I said, then I can too. And I said, I'm not taking orders from these people.
And unfortunately, those idiots make it into OCCB, and they're the ones trying to tell you how to run a case. And like you said, those were the guys hiding in the borough,
Yep.
hiding in the property clerk's office. And they have no frame of reference to anything.
Nope.
And they're telling you what to do. So like you said, you took a promotional exam. I retired at 20 because it started hitting me in my later years as a detective. And I said, oh, no. Mm-hmm. I had no interest in becoming a boss. And I said, that's me ringing the bell. I'm getting off at this stop.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And yeah, so that was it. So like I said, I was never on any fast track because of that, because I just like doing patrol. And I was able to take care of my guys, and I had a great group of guys, and they took care of me. I said they were collar machines. I mean, so that kept us out of hot water with the CO, because we always led the precinct in arrests. And so it was a great place to work.
So how did you wind up in Midtown?
Yeah, I had about 14 years on the job. I was able to get transferred into Midtown North, and I just wanted to see what the other side of. I had heard so much, and I had been in the ghetto 14 years, and you become like institutionalized. You don't think there's anything, and so I went. I said, I'm going to go to Midtown North. A couple of guys I worked with as cops were sergeants there now. They had gotten sent there, and they say, hey, it's really nice. Come check it out. So I did. It was just a whole different world. And it was strange for me just being out and seeing white people every day. That was really weird. Like having, like dealing with white people. I was very uncomfortable my first few months. I don't know why, but I was just really uncomfortable. And then, it was very different. But it was great. I mean, people were generally happy to see you, and, you ran around. I mean, it was still very busy, but it was just, you're not busy with the violence and that stuff. But you do learn to handle a lot of high profile events, because so much is happening there in Midtown. So it's a whole different, you learn how to handle huge crowds. You learn how to handle high, events where, all the TV, Channel 7 News is there, Channel 4, where everything's televised. High profile events. You learn how to handle all of that too. So it's kind of a whole different style of policing. But I really enjoyed it. It was it was very senior though. Guys went there and they never left. So you had cops there with 25, 30 years. You had sergeants there with 15 years in rank. Once people went there, they didn't leave. It was really nice. It was really nice. So I'd done patrol for 19 years, and I was getting kind of burned out. I need to get something, or I'm gonna pull the plug next year. 20, and then I was able to get the theater squad spot right in my 19th year. Where you're in charge of all the Broadway theaters.
I didn't even know that was a detail.
Oh yeah, that's a steady detail. That's the best detail in the city. That's Midtown North, and Midtown South has one as well, but Midtown North is bigger. So it's one sergeant and 8 cops, and you handle all the Broadway shows, and like also all the shows like where they film, like the Colbert Report, like the Ed Sullivan Theater, Jimmy Fallon show. You handled all that for all those things. So
did you get to meet a lot of famous people?
Yeah, I met everyone. It was like I said, and coming from where I came from, this was like a complete world. So you meet everyone, and they genuinely appreciated you. Like they really liked they wanted their cop at their theater. So each cop got like one block, and he would handle all the theaters on that block. And they don't want to call 911 and wait. They just want to have that cop there all the time. But they're very supportive of you, and it was nice. So I would just park the car wherever, and I would walk, me and my partner, and we would just walk from theater to theater, scratch the guys. I'd walk all around Times Square, and it was great. And I must have walked Bill Clinton in 10 times to Broadway shows, because he used to come down all the time. He and Hillary Clinton, the Obamas, and all the people who were in the shows too. So.
You got any funny stories with a famous person, like on a job?
Yeah, not too much. I didn't. They were all good. I tell you, lots of nice people. The people who stand out as really good people. Remember Chaz Palminteri? He was a Bronx guy. He was from Belgium. Yes, great guy. And that guy, I tell you, he had a show called The Bronx Tale, and that guy would spend an hour every night after his show signing autographs, pictures with people. Really a good guy. You see, he really cared about his audience. And also Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad, another guy. He did a couple of shows, LBJ and a couple other ones.
Oh, yeah.
Another great guy, and he would be out there for an hour. It didn't matter if it was pouring rain. He would sign for everyone, pictures, everything. He was really a good guy. So it was a lot of fun. Dave Chappelle, he did his Netflix special right in our precinct. Great guy. Entourage, they smoke a lot of pot. So it was a lot of fun, and I did that. It was great until COVID happened. And then everything went on lockdown. And, the next thing you know, we had the the riots of 2020. It was like the purge there for 3 nights. There was about 3 nights there where it was very close that we lost the city. I mean, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. I mean, it was just burning cars, smashing windows, running in, looting the stores, running out. I mean, it was anarchy. It was 3 nights of anarchy, and that whole summer was bad. So it was really crazy.
Did you have the backing of the city? Because what I noticed a lot of times was I didn't see hats and bats. And I used to say, where are the helmets? You know, that was the first, I mean, when I was on the job, like you had a riot or something, that's the first thing, hats and bats.
No, we were basically used as like wooden soldiers. Just stand out there, get pelted with rocks, bottles, frozen water bottles, bottles of urine, and take no enforcement action. You were just a target out there. Everyone was. And that was the year I decided it was time to go. For me, I could not deal with this, how soft the department became and how political it became. And I said, yeah, that's it. And then the next year, it was 2021. I was just driving into work, and I'd been thinking about retiring. And I was just driving into work, and I felt like I had a piano on my chest. I mean, I felt like I couldn't breathe, and I had never felt that way before. And I just said, I don't want to do this anymore. We had just had the whole summer was miserable. They tried to overrun our precinct. So I said, it's just time to go. And I always thought I would do 25 or, even 27. But like I said, I didn't leave. The department left me. And then I was also the SBA delegate. I was a PBA delegate. And I saw when they put in that, that diaphragm law, how nebulous the wording that in that diaphragm law is and how easily a cop could be charged just for, taking someone down and making an arrest. And then you don't have the indemnification anymore like you did. Depending on the situation, you have partial, but you're not getting immunity anymore, qualified immunity like you were before. And I was in an SBA meeting, and Ed Mullen said, yeah, the city turned around and settled without informing one of our members, and now he's on the hook for $300,000. And I was just like, I'm not losing my house. I'm not losing my, everything I worked for this. And said 22 was enough. Yeah, then I pulled the plug shortly thereafter. I loved the job. I had a wonderful time, no regrets, but it definitely has changed dramatically. Policing across the country. And the NYPD always leads the way. We're the first in everything. And everyone kind of, for better or for worse, everyone emulates what we do. Well, we saw that our chiefs and our PCs and mayors have completely sold us out. The city council is like enemy number one of the NYPD. I think, unfortunately, I think the job is impossible to do today. If one of my kids expressed interest in law enforcement, I would definitely steer them towards the federal level, or I would say go down to Florida, Texas, somewhere else, but not here, not anymore, unfortunately. The job changed more in the last 5 years than it did the previous, 15 or 20. It was crazy.
Seismic shift.
They would always call them peaceful protesters. No, they weren't. They were rioters, and they would just let them take over the streets and do whatever they wanted. Before, the minute you stepped in the street and you blocked traffic, you got locked up. Now they would just let them march wherever they want, inconvenience everyone, tie up traffic, take over the Brooklyn Bridge. They just gave them basically keys to the city,
And in the old days, they needed a permit to protest. And if you didn't have a permit, everybody's going.
Yes. And you definitely couldn't block the street. You would have a route that you would have to follow. Now they let them do whatever. And it started in 2014. And it just got worse and worse. And then it was like this tremendous sea change, in 2020. It was like living in bizarro world. It was time to go. I love the job, but it does dominate your life. It doesn't leave a lot of time for much else. And you know that. And so I wanted to see my kids more. I don't want to be that dad that when I'm old and gray, it's like I didn't know my kids. So it was worth it. So, I took a job with the sheriff's office up here, and I worked as a school resource officer in my kids' high school. And it was a lot of fun. So I got to spend a lot of time with my kids.
I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's go, 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 go. And then we worked in a level, there's that constant paranoia. It's like, what did I do now? What's coming next? And you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's weird.
Yep. And I can tell you, I've been, I work for a suburban department upstate now. I've been doing that for over 2 years. And there's just no comparison, though. Like you said, the stress levels. You're not looking over your shoulder constantly because there is no one there. They don't have inspections. They don't have like they don't have a city council that's looking to hang you to the wall or a mayor who's looking to throw you under the bus. Well, the town supervisor and the town council, they actually support you and they like you. And you get support from them. It's nice. And it's no comparison. There's working in a major city like New York, Chicago, Philly, Boston, and then there's everything else as far as law enforcement.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just the pace that you work at. It's incredible.
It can and has ruined a lot of lives.
Yes. And I did not want that to be me. And I said, I still got my health, so it's best to get out now. It definitely, I lost weight when I got out. My friends say I looked less stressed. I just, you feel better. I exercise and you just, I always noticed that guys would come back a year or two after they retired. I'm like, wow, he looks great. Look at it, like guys just naturally look better. Mm-hmm. So now some guys go the other way, they drink too much, they don't have any hobbies, this and that. My goal was I'm going to work part-time and I'm going to do all those things that I always wanted to do, that I never had time for. And so far it's worked out. It's been great. You become institutionalized working in the NYPD or any major police department, and you think that there's nothing else out there in the world, and I think you're always, like you said, waiting for another shoe to drop. You're always ready to get screwed. You're always assuming, no, this is too good. It can't be this good. Something's going to happen. And I'm waiting for like the horrible thing to happen. And I was like, I'm not commuting to the city anymore. I don't have any more stress. I'm making, working part-time. So I'm definitely taking home a lot more money. I see my wife and kids. I'm happy. It's like once your life is going really good and like, wow, this is good. Guess this is the way most other people live.
Jesse, I really appreciate you being a guest, and I want to thank you, for your service and spending your time with us today.
Thanks a lot, pal. It was great. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Where you can preview all my NYPD books for free, including NYPD Presumption and Dysfunction. Thank you again, and I'll see you guys next week.